And in a particularly brutal instance, Goodrich capitalized on having a Tavio and a butterfly guard to get his feet inside the Brazilian's tights and squeezed his testicles with his toes.
Hello everyone, and welcome to MMA Start to Finish. I'm Julian, and this is Matt.
Hi.
And today, for the very first time, we're going to be talking about Pride. We got into things immediately, hence why we only have a very clearly Dragon Ball Z influenced dragon to show you in the lead up to the fight.
Yeah, it was pretty much immediate, going from this animation and showing a flurry of pictures of different fighters to the fight starting.
It went from a music video from 1988 to the first fight immediately. No rules given, no time limits given, no introductions or even visuals in English for the fighters we're about to see. Just immediately into the action.
Yeah, the only way we heard of the fighters' names was
commentary.
Yeah.
By the way, we should note the commentators for Pride 1 are Steven Quadros and Bas Rutten, who I believe are our commentators for quite some time. So get used to them and their unusual levels of honesty for commentary, which we'll get into later.
This starting animation was basically a strobe light with pictures of fighters in between the flashes. And we start in a boxing ring.
Yes, we are in a ring for Pride, as opposed to the UFC where we've been in a cage. And Pride, for those of you unaware, at no point does Pride ever move to a cage. The unique differentiator from Pride to the UFC was always the ring to the cage, which is very different to fight in.
It presents its own difficulties.
And its own unique officiating tasks that we'll get into later.
The attendance has skyrocketed compared to what we're used to.
Yeah, to the most recent UFC, this is a nearly tenfold increase of attendance.
Yeah, our last one had 5,000 attendees.
Yeah, UFC had 5,000 roughly attendees.
Yeah, this one has 47,000.
They are in the Tokyo Dome, which today is still, to my knowledge, one of the larger venues to do things in Japan. So, a lot of capital behind this first ever Pride event, and a lot of star power. A common theme we'll see throughout a lot of these fights tonight, and throughout Pride in general, especially early on, is we'll see a lot of Japanese professional wrestlers who have a big name fighting trained killers. So this first fight, which we cut into immediately with no context, was John Dixon taking on Kazunari Murakami. I could be pronouncing that wrong, but that's my best.
Yeah, that's what the commentator said, so we're going to assume that's correct.
So we don't have a lot of information about John Dixon. He does not have a Wikipedia page. Kazunari does. His Wikipedia page is largely about his professional wrestling career, which took up a lot more of his, career than his mixed martial arts work did.
So, John started off with an early shoot, but it didn't really get anywhere, so they both stood up. Kazunari then goes for a judo toss, takes down John, and kind of just sits on his face in like a reversed kind of mount.
Yeah, punches him in the chest.
Yeah, and then realizes, oh, there's an arm here. Takes it, and then gets an arm bar. John taps, and I think we see a towel fly in.
That was the next fight.
Oh, okay.
But this is the first fight in Pride history, and the first ever L taken by John Dixon, and the first W for Kazunari.
Mm-hmm.
Kazunari, we actually apparently would not see for several more years after winning the first ever Pride fight. So there's really no artful transitions between fights here. It's like a lot of harsh, cut to loud heavy metal music that is not scaled to the volume of commentary in the rest of the show.
No.
And the first time they did that cut, it got a serious pop out of Matt and I.
Yeah.
Because this is what came across our screen. Now, mind you, if you're unaware, we go into these having no prior knowledge of the card outside of what they tell us during the event, for the most part.
Or like what the poster for it is.
Yeah,
That's it.
that's really our only inkling, unless I have prior knowledge of the event. But I had no memory of what the fights were in Pride 1, so when this popped up on our screen, we got very excited.
Yeah, we're like, wow! And partially, that was just because it attacked our ears.
Yeah, it was so not subtle.
It was a great moment.
So before we get into the fight for Gary and Oleg, we were wondering what these two had been doing since we last saw them in the UFC. So Gary has been competing in Vale Tudo in Japan, and boy howdy, one of those fights wound up becoming quite a funny story.
So in this Vale Tudo fight or tournament, this was him getting into the finals. I'll just read from the Wikipedia. He faced it's Luta Livre?
Yeah, you got it.
Stylist Pedro
Otavio?
Sorry if we're getting that wrong. As the IVC rule set allowed groin shots. The fight featured multiple low blows intertwined with grappling exchanges. And in a particularly brutal instance, Goodrich capitalized on having Otavio in a butterfly guard to get his feet inside the Brazilian's tights and squeezed his testicles with his toes. Gary, you savage man.
Finally, after grabbing again Otavio's testicles from the clinch, Goodrich overpowered him and landed strikes for the KO, winning the tournament. So Gary, no holds barred, doesn't give a flying fuck about your ability to produce children.
No. Oh, God. Like, I hope he clipped his nails before that.
So since the Ultimate 95, the last time we saw Oleg in the UFC, he's been fighting all over the place, also competing in Vale Tudo, as well as Pancrase, the World Fighting Federation. There's a lot of promotions that don't even have Wikipedia pages, so it's kind of slim pickings for trying to learn about these weird-ass promotions these guys fought in the late 90s. But anyway, Oleg, very active between his last UFC appearance and his first Pride appearance.
He fought Marco Huas and Renzo Gracie before all this.
Surprisingly, this fight started out with both guys behaving very cautiously. Gary, clearly the much larger, angrier man, I kind of expected to just bull rush in and go for an early knockout, especially with his prior style.
Yeah, he's not known for his patience.
Yeah, and is a matter of fact known for the opposite, kind of gassing out at the end of fights or the end of tournaments sometimes.
Yeah. Maybe he's realizing that he shouldn't just go all out all the time, you know?
When they eventually did pick up the pace a little bit, Gary drilled Oleg, knocking him to the ground in what most UFC fights today, and even back then, probably would have called for Big John to step in and end the fight. But in Japan, let him die. Who cares? Followed up with some knees that were very mean and some more hammer fists on the ground, and then they would eventually both make their way back up to their feet again, where Oleg looked like he had just been hit with a truck.
Yeah. He gets cut up a few times in this fight. He had one that looked like it was in his sideburn, and another on his cheek.
A lot of scar tissue for Oleg.
Yeah. We're also commentating, just as this fight was starting, when they were feeling each other out, how Oleg was the one who beat Tank in the finals, and they even mentioned that on commentary. And I countered with, everyone beats Tank in the finals.
This is true. Tank has not exactly had success on the big stage so far that we've seen.
He is the final bar you must...
I believe they call that in sports a gatekeeper.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a double-edged sword title, because that means you're like a top contender, but you're not good enough to ever actually win it.
No.
For the NHL fans out there, you're the San Jose Sharks of the UFC. Tank Abbott.
So after Oleg gets beaten up a little bit, he shoots for Gary. He doesn't shoot. He shot for Gary. But Gary counters it, and they just kind of go into a bit of a wild swing. But Gary sneaks in a rock, and Oleg becomes a cosmonaut, getting knocked out onto the floor.
Basically, Gary sent him into a different galaxy.
Yeah.
With that right hook. caught him in a very tender spot. If you saw in the replay, caught him right on the temple. And then because we don't have large Jonathan here to, you know, officiate the proceedings, this referee comes in very late, and Gary is able to follow up with 2 more very violent hooks as Oleg is on the floor, leading to Oleg having to be stretchered out. Now, if I saw this today, I would have been really worried about that dude.
Yeah.
I know Oleg didn't die, so to me, I was kind of just like, holy shit, Gary's a monster. But I imagine to, you know, live spectators, it was kind of scary to see Oleg go out like that.
The poor man.
Speaking of Oleg going out like that, apparently in one of his recent interviews, he had quite a bit to say about Gary's victory.
Oleg attributed Gary Goodrich's victory to the peak of a anabolic steroid cycle that Goodrich allegedly went through prior to the fight. Oleg further asserted that Goodrich's following performance, a string of losses apparently, clearly indicated the downtrend of the steroid cycle. So he was peaking right now.
Yeah, and I will say, it's not like Gary stuck out like a sore thumb necessarily on this card. I'd wager that probably 70% of this card was juicing. And as we have like hinted at earlier, and as many people know, Pride didn't exactly have the strictest drug testing policy in the world. Ensign Inoue on the Joe Rogan podcast mentioned that in the contract it explicitly stated that they do not test for steroids. So all of these dudes could be shooting human growth hormone straight into their neck, and Pride would never lift a finger to do a damn thing about it.
Nope. Although Gary won, he then celebrated too hard and hurt his leg.
That is what it looked like happened. I forgot about that.
Yeah, so he was kind of holding his knee a little bit, and he was happy he got his giant trophy that they give to all the winners.
That is true. We did fail to mention that after the first fight. The winner of every fight tonight got a giant-ass trophy and a giant bouquet of flowers in true Japanese
showmanship.
Yes.
Big, flashy ways of doing
pizzazz,
things.
ambiance. Up next, we have a Gracie sighting. Renzo Gracie taking on Akira Shoji. Now, before we get into the fight, let's see what Renzo has been up to prior to his Pride debut, as we did not see him in the UFC before this. So Renzo has quite a few fun stories for us to read off before his Pride fighting days. First, fighting in World Combat Championships against Ben Spijkers. It looks like a Nordic name that my English mouth is having trouble to pronounce. Will have trouble pronouncing, but that's not important. What is important is apparently Ben would taunt, or I guess pranked, Gracie in his hotel room the previous night. Not a lot of info given here on Wikipedia about what that prank was, but apparently at the end of the fight, after Renzo had defeated him, he intentionally stepped on his head as he walked away as an act of revenge for the pranking. Apparently an act he later apologized for. Now, if you think that's a little strange, boy howdy, do we have some ridiculous shit to share with you before we get into the fight.
So Renzo also fought in what's called Pentagon Combat, so not quite the octagon.
Notable, this is a Brazilian promotion. So this fight we're about to talk about with you occurred in Brazil, not in the States.
Yeah. But there are two opposing factions of fighting styles. There was the Eugenio Tadu. He was the guy he was fighting, who practiced luta libre, and that was in a big rivalry with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So a lot of people were not in huge agreement.
A lot of the audience consisted of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys and luta libre guys, so it's like a European or a South American soccer match where they should probably have law enforcement in the audience separating the crowd, but
they decided not to do that.
They didn't have proper security for the event.
They actually had people sneak into the arena. Renzo didn't help the audience very much when he stalled against the cage wall, and audience members then fought their way through security and started attacking both of the fighters through the netting.
Screaming insults, apparently.
Yeah, they were able to punch. Thankfully, no one stabbed anyone through it.
Some spectators climbed the fence while others tried to pull them down.
Yeah. People started throwing chairs and other items that they could. This is only 400 people in this audience, by the way.
So before the chairs were thrown, they did stop the match briefly to clear some of the fans out and actually attempted to continue the fight, which on its own is insane. But apparently the crowd came back in, and Gracie decided he was done with the shit and started fighting back after he was struck by some of the spectators.
Yeah. Eventually, the lights go off, and gunshots go off. The event reasonably caused mixed martial arts to be banned in Rio de Janeiro, but for 10 years that's a bit much.
Yeah, so this little blurb here on Wikipedia doesn't give us enough details to know if somebody got killed when those gunshots went off, what happened after things were sorted out. All we have is that this ended with mixed martial arts being banned for a decade, so kind of a bummer for those that are fans of the sport in Brazil.
This is the kind of thing that we joke about how, like, the lights go out, gunshots go off, and one person stands up or whatever.
Yeah.
And that actually happened. That's a little scary.
I can't even imagine what it would be like to, like, be somebody working that event or be a member of the audience who doesn't have, like, a dog in that fight.
Yeah.
Actually terrifying.
And to make matters, well, I don't know if it makes it worse, because who knows what would have happened after the event, but they didn't declare a winner.
So Henzo's opponent in this debut in Pride was Akira Shoji, who they kind of talked him up like he was a cupcake for Henzo to come in and smash, but the fight actually played out much more competitively than anybody could have guessed.
Yeah. We expected this to be a short fight.
And the thing is, too, to this point, we have no way of knowing, like, how long are rounds? Are there rounds? What's the time limit? What happens when the time limit expires? Is there an overtime? None of these questions have answers. So, at this point, when this fight actually starts taking more than 5 minutes, we begin to wonder, how's this going to play out?
Yeah. And to make matters worse, when they do eventually explain the rules for some of these,
They change them later.
there's different rules for these different fights.
It's all over the place, but somehow still amazing.
Yeah. It's wild.
So even though Shoji put on a good performance against Henzo, that doesn't mean Henzo did not control large portions of this fight. A lot of this fight was Henzo just, going through the positions on the ground, getting mount several times, getting back mount several times, and attempting arm bars, triangles, rear naked chokes, not landing any of them, to the surprise of both me and Matt and the Japanese audience.
Yeah. And there's a lot of rope nonsense going on.
Yeah, this is where we would finally start to see some of the big differences between the UFC and Pride pan out. When there was a grappling exchange that got too far into the ropes, by the way, we should mention you are not allowed to grab the ropes, despite how poorly they do at enforcing that rule. That is a rule, you can't grab the ropes. So when you get into the ropes too much during a grappling exchange, you keep your position, but 3 referees come into the ring and pick you up and carry you both to the center of the octagon, or the center of the ring, not the octagon, in the same position you were in.
And
very weird.
I feel like in the times that we could see this happening, that they would slightly shift their position to, like, try to get an advantage on the other person, which, I mean, the 3 refs are doing the best that they can to make sure it stays as it was.
I mean, I'll be transparent. I don't watch a lot of ONE FC, which is sort of like the modern day Pride. It's the MMA promotion in Japan, but they do still have a ring. So I wonder how they sort out the rope situation, if they have the same, we reset you in the same position in the center of the ring, or they have another way of handling that. So here we'd finally start to understand the round system a little bit, or so we thought. The first round ended after what felt like 10 minutes, and we would later find out was 10 minutes. And then the second round would end after 10 minutes, and we sort of had a feeling for how the fights were arranged.
Yeah. Though we didn't know yet how many rounds there were.
Yeah, so after each round, we were kind of just like, waiting ambiguously for there to potentially be another round. And after the third round, I think, at least I did, I don't know if you did, I expected them to go to some sort of judges to render a decision.
Yeah.
But no, if you reach the 30-minute time limit and nobody's able to achieve a finish, it's a draw.
It felt like a pretty even match, though, so it wasn't like a controversial kind of draw.
No, and what we should also mention that's a big difference from the UFC shows we've been talking about, the Japanese crowd is way more respectful than all of the American crowds. So even though this was a rather technical, slow-paced fight, no booing from the crowd. As a matter of fact, late in the fight, when Akira was able to shake off Henzo's armbar attempt, the crowd roared in excitement, even late into the fight.
Henzo, he tried everything. You already said that, but he really did try everything. He was on his back, tried the armbar, tried a guillotine choke at one point.
That's true, yeah.
I think he tried a triangle at one point.
All kinds of submissions.
Yeah, nothing was working. Akira was just too sweaty and too slippery.
And too stout. He was a 5'8", 198, so that is I believe they call that a brick shithouse.
Yeah. He had a Gracie brand backpack at one point and didn't do anything.
He did. He had Henzo Gracie on his back and somehow did not lose that fight.
Yeah.
The one thing Akira did have a lot of success with, though, was his leg kicks.
Oh my
They
God,
really
yeah.
started to add up. And even though, like, in a world where we had to score this fight with, like, modern stipulations and declare a winner, it would have been really hard to judge because Henzo controlled the position a lot with the grappling, but wasn't really able to achieve a submission, where Akira was just eating up his leg with those kicks.
Yep. And one rule that we did find out for the fighting is there are no knees to the head allowed when on the ground.
Considering Pride allows you to, like, literally curb stomp people, I think that's kind of insane. But, hey, I don't make the rules. So after this surprising draw where Shoji survived 30 minutes in the ring with a Gracie, he picked up the microphone and yelled some stuff. Now, Matt and I don't speak Japanese, so we have no clue what he said, but we do have Wikipedia here for us to tell us what he said.
What do you say now, Gracies? Who said the Japanese were the weakest?
So apparently the Gracies had been talking some shit about Japanese fighters, I guess, before this event. And Akira Shoji showed them that they are not to be trifled with.
I guess because it was like, I guess Helios. Now I'm speaking for Helios, but what I'm going to gather from this is that the ranking Gracies believed that they had improved upon the original martial art.
Of jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so they were bragging in that sense. And now Akira had won, so it's like, well, if it's so good, how come I won?
Well, he didn't win, but he reached a draw. He wasn't trounced like everybody thought he would be.
And was able to keep Henzo from getting any real good submissions on him.
Yeah, over a half-hour period, which is pretty damn impressive.
Yeah.
Up next, we have the Clash of the Titans. Nathan Jones, friend of Undertaker, taking on Michiharu Kitao?
Kitao.
Again, before we get into the fight, some insane shit to share with you about the backstory for both these guys.
There's over 800 pounds of fighting in this.
Oh, yes. I should also probably follow up on that Clash of the Titans comment. Let's see. What is the combined weight and what is the combined height for these guys?
835 pounds and over 13 feet.
Two very large gentlemen squaring off.
My God.
Here we see another sumo wrestler in mixed martial arts in Koji Kitao, who has probably the most checkered past of any sumo wrestler I've ever seen. So apparently he was promoted to Yokozuna in a controversial... For those of you that don't know, Yokozuna is the top rank of sumo wrestling. He was promoted to that sort of by default when someone else stepped out, I believe. But that's not really where things become super interesting. After he was controversially promoted, apparently it backfired and he proved to be, quote, a great embarrassment to the sumo establishment. Several of his junior stablemates refused to serve under him following an incident in '87 where he physically punished one of them. I don't know what that means. That's vague and unnerving.
Yeah. Following that, in 1987, he had a heated argument with his stable boss, What is a stable boss?
I suppose it's sort of like the head of your gym in sumo wrestling.
All right, because I'm just imagining like someone who owns a stable and treating these people like horses.
Stable has a couple different meanings, but I like
Yeah.
that. That's good.
He then stormed out and allegedly striked his stable boss's wife. So that is not okay.
Not excellent.
Not-
Following that, they stripped him of his rank, and he had to retire in disgrace.
Yeah. He didn't argue about the being forced to retire though. So,
Kind of hard to.
yeah.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have Nathan Jones for you. Nathan Jones only ever had one MMA fight, this one here. But, boy, do we have a lot of crazy shit to share with you about his life. So before we get into his career, let's get into his prior career.
Yeah. So, Jones is an Australian man. He was born in Gold Coast, Queensland, Australia. Before his career as a wrestler, Jones was sentenced to 16 years in 1987 at the age of 18 to Bogo Road Gaol?
Which apparently is a maximum security prison.
Yeah.
How did he end up in a maximum security prison, you ask? Well,
During a string of armed robberies, he became Australia's most wanted and ended up serving 7 years in the maximum security prison. In 1994, he was given 1 year work release before being discharged at the age of 25. While in prison, he was introduced to the sport of powerlifting and allegedly began taking steroids at that time.
which, if you could see his physique, is not exactly a shocking revelation.
Yeah. He is a mountain of a man.
Now, I thought I had heard the name Nathan Jones before, and in a much younger life, I was an extremely avid pro wrestling fan, and I was correct. I had heard his name before. He was the one who was supposed to tag team with the frickin' Undertaker at WrestleMania 19. Now, I say supposed to because I don't remember exactly what happened with the fallout there, but he never showed up for the match, and apparently was awarded by Wrestling Observer Newsletter Most Embarrassing Wrestler of 2003 for that great dishonor.
Yeah.
So we read into it a little bit. I do just want to add that the reason, on script for pro wrestling that he wound up not competing in that WrestleMania match was he was attacked backstage. Now that I think about this and talk about it a little more, I'm pretty sure the reason they wound up writing him out of WrestleMania was because he was really bad and not super great and not hurting people because he's huge.
I mean, look at him. For our movie buffs, you may recognize him from the movie Troy in that beginning scene. He's the big guy.
He's the giant dude from Troy. It's freaking great.
Yeah. He was also in the 2011 movie Conan the Barbarian as Akun. I don't know if that's an important role. He was also in Mad Max Fury Road. You'll know when you see him. And he's in the new
Scorpion
King movie.
Not exactly a blockbuster, but still quite the filmography for Nathan Jones.
Yeah. He has a cast type as the big guy.
The giant scary dude, considering he spent multiple years in a maximum security prison for armed robbery, I'd say he fits the role pretty well.
Yep.
So to be honest with you guys, we probably spent more time talking about the context and we're actually going to wind up talking about the fight. It went pretty quick, and we did briefly mention this was Nathan Jones' only mixed martial arts fight. After a little bit of squaring off on the feet,
Nathan started with a spinning crescent kick, by the way.
he did
That
have
was
some
wild.
pretty fancy strikes to show off early.
Yeah.
None of them landed, mind you.
No.
Was probably taken down by Katao, and with little to no resistance, Katao put him in a key lock Americana and brute forced his way to victory
Yeah.
in 2 minutes and 14 seconds. Honestly, it didn't feel like it went that long even.
No, they tested each other on the feet a little bit. Commentary did point out that Nathan seemed to be struggling on his back. Like, he was putting a lot more effort into things than he really needed to be.
Yeah, he clearly didn't have actual grappling experience.
Yeah. And they did point out that he kind of just gave Katao his arm.
Up next, we have something real weird. So, Pride likes to just kind of throw in random shit sometimes during their events, and the random fight on Pride 1 was a kickboxing match between Ralph White who has no Wikipedia page, unfortunately, and Branko Sikotic, a Croatian fighter who is notorious for not exactly being the world's most honorable man.
Yeah. They start off the fight with Branko giving a fake glove tap, instead kicking Ralph.
Yeah, opening with that spinning kick. I forgot about that.
Yeah. Branko gets Ralph at some punch that I can't remember. But Ralph goes down, ends up against the rope and in the corner. And at that point, in this kind of fight, you can't hit the other person.
Yeah, you gotta stop and let dudes stand up. This is a kickboxing fight, sir. This isn't a street fight.
Yeah. And proceeds to kick Ralph in the head with his shin.
Soccer kicks him right in the brain like a dickhead for basically no reason. And from this point forward, we would have some major controversy. So obviously the fight was stopped after this, and it would not start again, but we wouldn't find that out until much later. Now, the head of our friend Ralph here is in some serious trouble.
Yeah.
Now, after getting kicked in the face, you probably expect some bruising, a cut, or, some damage. You just got kicked in the face. But what we wound up seeing is perhaps the most cartoonish swelling I've ever seen in my entire life. I will say right now, if you're listening to this on any platform that's not YouTube, go to YouTube right now. Look at this man's damn head. It looks like he's growing a freaking moon around his head.
It's real crazy just how fast this appears on his head.
Yeah, because first you see a little bump, and then 0.8 seconds later, you see a satellite planet.
Yeah.
And this isn't the best photograph of that bruise. This photo here much better illustrates just how, I guess, girthy the bruise was. I don't know how else to phrase that.
Yeah. Jesus, Ralph.
Dude, the look on his face right now is like, you motherfucker. I can't believe you've done this.
You started this fight dirty and you ended it dirty. How could you?
He's looking at him like, I want to punch you in the mouth so fucking bad right now.
Yeah. Branko does apologize. I don't think he really feels apologetic.
I don't really buy his apology, because before he apologized in his corner, he goes like, why they always take from me?
Yeah.
Dude, you kicked him in the brain when he was on the ground. You can't do that.
He said, quote, "Why do they steal from me?" And one of the Japanese refs said, "Don't illegal."
I didn't hear that.
Yeah, so just some broken English going back and forth, and it was great. And it ended up with no contest for Ralph.
So not quite a disqualification win, just the fight was thrown out. And considering its weird-ass setup to begin with, probably for the best.
Yeah.
So when Gary and Oleg popped up onto our screen, we got very excited. When Chemo and Dan popped up onto our screen, we lost our shit.
Yeah.
Now, we haven't seen Dan or Chemo for a while, and they both reached very high heights in the UFC. So a lot of built-up nostalgia for these guys.
Chemo's back with more tattoos. Dan got a haircut. They're ready to fight.
Now, since we've last seen Chemo at the Ultimate 96, he's had one fight where he defeated Brian Johnston by a forearm choke in the Ultimate Explosion in Honolulu, Hawaii.
Brian just can't get out of these forearm chokes.
Yeah, this is a bad look. This is the second time in 1997 where we saw him lose to a choke that if you got beat by in 2019, you would be shamed for. A little more understandable in 1997. The sport hadn't developed yet, but not an excellent look for somebody who looked very good early on.
Yeah.
But anyway, we digress. Brian's not on this card.
Meanwhile, Dan's been very busy.
Since his loss to Mark Coleman, he's gone on a tear, kicking ass all over the planet in the Extreme Challenge, in the Vale Tudo Championship, and in the Super Brawl, among others.
He was in 7 other fights between his last UFC event and this Pride event.
Some of them I'm noticing are like he fought twice in 1 month, which is a little insane. Like he fought twice in August and he fought twice in September. Chemo and Dan are both grapplers, so we expected to see them come out, maybe get in a couple clinches early, feel things out. We did not expect them to have a stalled, shitty kickboxing match for half an hour.
Yeah. At first, we were just kind of like, oh, they're going to try and go for a striking match.
Which was interesting. They're feeling things out early. Dan had, like, an okay jab. Chemo looked like he had some power. it was interesting for a couple minutes there.
Yeah. Dan's a big man. He's in his 40s, so he's a little older. But, I mean, look at him. He's a large man. He's got that farm strength. Chemo, he's clearly working out. Probably doing a little bit of supplements.
And taking his vitamins.
So, they've both got the potential for power strikes. Neither of them really put that out, though.
Neither of them have the technique to pair with that power, and neither of them... Well, I say neither of them wanted to get into a grappling exchange, but Dan, surprisingly, throughout the fight, shot several times, and all of them were horrible.
They were all really
bad. I guess the dynamic completely changes now that he's in a ring as opposed to a cage. It is a little bit easier to grind a guy up against the fence and take him down than it is against the ropes, where very often the ref will step in and do some mediating with grabbing the ropes and stuff. So
yeah.
Changes the dynamic, but yikes, dude. So another thing we should mention is that apparently they decided to change the rules for this fight, where instead of having 3 10-minute rounds, we just had a 30-minute long fight.
Yeah.
Which even commentary didn't know. Boss Rutan on commentary mentioned at like the 15-minute mark that they said, oh, we're at the halfway point, so I guess this one is a 30-minute fight and there's no rounds. Again, utter shit show, but in the best way possible. Not this fight. Not this fight the best way possible, but the event as a whole, rather.
So the most effective move we saw in this fight was just Chemo's leg kicks. Dan's right thigh became pretty much beet red by the end of this.
These were no Marco Huas leg kicks, but in a fight where almost nothing happened, they were about the most impactful thing. And had this been an organization where we saw judges, I would have expected the fight to go Chemo's way.
Yeah.
But we're in Pride, and in Pride 1997, no judges. If you meet that time limit, we have a draw. The ultimate unsatisfying ending
to an unsatisfying
fight. The only bit of action we had from Dan was at the end. He actually did wind up being able to take Chemo down, but by the time he had him in side control, there was 10 seconds left in the fight. So it's not like he could really do a whole lot with that.
Yeah. Commentary even started talking just about commentary.
Yeah, dude, commentary was not having it during this fight.
No.
Now, Steven Quadros and Boss Rutan had a much more casual commentary style as opposed to what we're used to with the UFC at this time.
Mm-hmm.
But even for them, they started to get real fucking impatient as this fight went on. Steven Quadros talking about how he wouldn't pay money to see this and all kinds of crazy shit you'd never hear UFC commentators be allowed to say.
Yeah. Quote, thank God it's over.
Yeah. He said the crowd was relieved when the fight ended.
Yeah. Even Japan was getting a little bit rowdy towards the end of this fight because just nothing was happening.
It's time for the main event. The trained assassin that is Rickson Gracie taking on Nobuhiko Takada in Takada's first ever mixed martial arts fight, which is the most Pride booking on the face of the planet. Putting a world famous pro wrestler against a professional killer for his first fight.
And if we're not mistaken, this is the Gracie that they didn't put in the original UFC.
Because he'd be too tough.
Yeah. They wanted to put someone a little weaker. I guess not weaker, but just not as skilled.
Not as scary.
Yeah.
They wanted to be... I mean, this is just me, theory crafting here. But my theory is Hoist looks a little bit more deceptive. You're not going to expect him to be able to control you. Whereas Rickson looks like... I believe you called him Brazilian Agent 47.
He does.
Where he looks like he's ready to just send you to a different galaxy at any given time.
Yeah. And he's scary in the ring, too.
He looks at you like you're prey. He doesn't look at you like you're a person. He just stares you down. You noted his chin was up quite a bit.
His chin was almost pointing upward, and his hands were down because he's not a striker. He just wants to go for the takedown. I think if Nobuhiko was a striker...
or had any actual combat experience.
Yeah, he could have capitalized on that, but he doesn't.
The one note we have to share with you from Wikipedia before the fight is about... one of Rickson's opponents, actually, in Vale Tudo prior to his Pride debut. He defeated shoot wrestler Yuki Naka in the finals of the Vale Tudo tournament. Naka was almost blind from an earlier match against Gerard Gordeau, who was the runner-up in the first ever UFC to Hoist Gracie.
Mm-hmm.
Also the dude who kicked that nice Hawaiian man in the mouth and caused a tooth to go flying out of the cage.
Yeah. Do you think he ever got it back?
No,
Oh.
I don't.
Do you think someone has it?
On eBay, perhaps. Maybe we'll look after the podcast.
Yeah.
Not a lot of prologue to give you about Takada unless you'd like to hear about his professional wrestling years. Really, all you need to know is that he was a huge name in Japan, and his name is sort of what sold this event and the reason we saw such a ridiculous attendance for the first ever event for an organization.
Would he be like Japan's Hulk Hogan?
That is what they likened him to on commentary. So, even though Takada was likened to Hulk Hogan, he wasn't exactly the Hulk, the Incredible Hulk in the ring.
No. Before the fight, they sung both anthems, I guess just to get everyone hyped up. And we quickly go to a leg kick by Takada. Nobuhiko, I can say a lot better for some reason than Takada. Hickson, I want to say Rickson so bad. Hickson didn't really acknowledge it too much and just kind of stayed almost pinned in the center while Takada was running around the ring.
He absolutely controlled the position early on in this fight. He was not allowing Takada to take center stage.
Yeah, to the point where Hickson put his arms down and just kind of gave him a look like, come on.
Like, what are you doing?
Stop running around here. Let's fight. When they do get into a clinch, Hickson pins him to a corner, but the refs stop the fight.
And unlike in previous separations when the ropes were grabbed, they did not reset them in the same position they were in before. Now, this is just me talking shit here, but it is a little bit sketchy that the one time we see them change the way they officiate clinch breaks, it is to benefit the nationally famous pro wrestler who made the event possible. I'm not saying that it was like a deliberate choice. I'm saying perhaps there's some subconscious bias on the part of the officials.
I think part of that could just be that when you're grappling, you can change that where that is located a lot easier than when you're in a clinch, when you're both standing.
When you're on the feet, you're saying.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying, but it wasn't like Hickson was the one who grabbed the ropes to necessitate the official intervention. Takada was the one grabbing the ropes behind him. So you'd think if they were going to change their positioning, if anything, they'd put him on his back and have Hickson on top of him because he prevented a takedown by grabbing the ropes.
True.
But
true.
The rules are not that sophisticated.
Nope, not at all.
After the separation, Hickson would not allow Takada to get away again, picking him up with a really vicious double leg that echoed throughout the arena.
Oh, yeah.
Getting mount and then quickly transitioning into an armbar, where Pride 1 would end the same way it begun.
Yep. A poetic end.
Unlike Akira Shoji, Takada didn't exactly have a really strong showing here. And while the matchup, according to Wikipedia, was a huge economic success, which ensured new Pride events in the future, Takada's remarkably poor performance resulted in a comparable disappointment for Japanese audiences, drawing very negative comments and marking the beginning of the end of Takada as a main eventer. So, this real fight had poor implications for his pro wrestling career, because of the way pro wrestling, especially in the 90s, works in Japan, where their style is a lot more like, yes, we're working together here, but I am really beating the shit out of you when I smack you in the chest.
Yeah. One publication even likened him to a war criminal.
Which seems insane.
Yeah.
It seems like a pretty insane thing to say. But hey, I guess they take their shit pretty seriously.
Yeah.
It's still real to them, damn it.
Yeah.
After this, we would cut back to the same dragon intro that we cut in with, and just as abruptly as it begun, it would end. And that'd be the end of Pride 1.
Yeah.
A crazy roller coaster of some really cool shit and some really boring stuff as well.
Yeah. No ladders, unfortunately.
No, our prediction, our joking prediction from UFC 14 did not come to fruition. There was no ladders match in Pride 1. But hey, it's still the first event. Not a Pride event for our next show, but we did enjoy our first venture into Pride, and we look forward to talking more about Pride in the future.
Yeah, it was fun. I like the switch up of how it goes.
The pacing's very different, and so is the presentation.
It's weird, but I like it.
It's a nice alternative to the UFC. Up next on MMA Start to Finish, we have UFC 15, the Collision Course. Until then, thank you guys so much for listening. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next time for UFC 15.
Bye. We love you.